they had butted heads constantly. They both had really strong personalities, both very strong opinions. And he said, candidly, what turned the marriage around was his revelation. He had this thought. He said, I realized I don't like to be wrong. I am super competitive, but eventually I realized there is one thing that I am not going to compete in.
I got a question for you. When was your last fight with your spouse? You remember it? Maybe it was last week. Maybe it was last month. Maybe it was this morning. Maybe it was 5 minutes ago. Now, let me ask you this question. What did you fight about? If you can't remember exactly what you fought about, you might be in that highly happy couple category. What we're going to discover in this episode is that highly happy couples, the pros in marriage, they suffer from a unique case of conflict amnesia. One of the things that I love, Shaunti, is the secret menu at restaurants. So have you ever ordered off the secret menu?
You said something about the secret menu, and even though I worked at a restaurant, I'm not sure.
Usually, like I worked at Applebee's, we didn't have a secret menu, but like I'm talking about like some fast food places. Starbucks has a secret menu.
What?
Yeah. Did you not know this?
No, I did not know this. I'm not a Starbucks girl.
Okay,
so,
that's right. You wouldn't know.
I'm a Dunkin' Donuts girl, and they definitely do not have a secret menu. No. Okay.
Now I want to find out. Maybe somebody can look up. Does Dunkin' Donuts have a secret menu? Because this might blow Shaunti's mind.
This might. Bruce is now looking it up.
Yeah, Bruce looked that up for us. In-N-Out Burger has got a secret menu.
Really?
Have you been to In-N-Out?
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, it is the best burger under $5 as long as you have that expectation. Like this isn't a gourmet burger, but it is the best burger under $5 in my opinion. And they have a secret menu that you can order like a double animal style.
What?
They have a grilled cheese called the Flying Dutchman. So they have all this like lingo that's on and they call it secret menu, but most people know about it except you.
Except for me.
I'm glad that I can tell you. But it's kind of fun because you can walk in and you can order something that's clearly not in the menu and people are like looking at you going, what do you order? What is that? And it just passes on. So there's other restaurants. I'm sure there's like listeners might even like send in the comments like what their favorite place that has a secret menu. That would be really cool to find out. All that to say, that was
Dunkin'
a lot of...
does have one.
What?
Say that again, Bruce?
Dunkin' has a secret menu. You can get a hazelnut mocha, cocoa berry, toasted French vanilla.
Okay, you guys are like, my paradigm is shifting.
We are blowing Shaunti's mind right now. And by the way, we want to introduce our new sponsors, Dunkin'. This podcast runs on Dunkin', at least it does today. So all that to say, you know, we've really enjoyed this book. We're saving one more secret for our conclusion one. But before we conclude, there was a secret that you had found of highly happy couples that did not make the book. So It's on the secret menu.
It is on the secret menu. That is true.
And so there was originally 12 secrets that got published.
Yes. 12 secrets in the book. If you look at the book now,
there's 12 secrets. Yeah. But there's a 13th. Did they not want to have unlucky number 13? Was there like a hotel chain that doesn't have a floor 13?
I'll tell you actually what happened. No, it wasn't about the number. It was, Shaunti, you've written too many words.
Jen likes to say you speak too many words.
Yeah. You've written too many words. You're going to have to cut some. Yeah. And so you can either cut each chapter by quite a bit, or you can cut one of the secrets. Take your pick. And I'm like, oh, dang.
Man, so why did you cut this one?
Well, we had to cut something.
Okay.
Right? And so we basically said, out of all of them, this is the one that this is the one actually that we'll explain in a little bit, applied more to one demographic group than another. Young couples needed this more than every marriage. And so we decided to keep all the ones that applied to every marriage.
That's good.
Said that, you know, I feel bad cutting the one that was just for young couples.
Okay, so because we'll talk about how older couples kind of learn it intuitively.
Yes, already do this.
Right.
Yeah.
And even as we talk about it, it's like some of you that are listening that might be a little more seasoned, you'd be like, oh, yeah, this is easy. So with that, what is the bonus secret? So
the bonus secret for this is that highly happy couples have learned to just sort of let things go. And it's funny how often in talking to these happy couples, which it's not that there were no young couples, there were plenty of young couples that were highly happy. Like it was very broadly distributed. But on this topic, it was mostly the older couples. And we would hear things like, for example, we would say, one of the things Jeff loved to do, I think we've said this earlier in the season, is that Jeff loved stirring the pot a little bit.
Yeah, he does.
And he would ask the happy couples, like, take me through your last fight. Right? Like, he would just love doing that and get everybody all stirred up. It was, and we would learn so much. But one of the things that we heard pretty frequently was, oh my gosh, our last fight. Okay, so we just had a big one like a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And so it was on honey, what was it that we were so, we had all the emotion.
Exercise about.
And we were, okay, we've had plenty. Just give me a second. I'll be able to think. Let me, I can't remember the one from 2 weeks ago, but let me just, let me think about, because we've had so many of these. And it was, and they couldn't.
It's like all of a sudden they had short-term memory loss.
Yeah, they literally couldn't remember what their major disagreements were.
Yeah,
and they had them just like everybody else. The highly happy couples, like we said at the very beginning, they hurt each other's feelings. They have conflict. They have disagreements. But one of the things they clearly do is let it go.
Let it go. So everyone, now we're also sponsored by Frozen. The great musical by Disney. And so, we've got, what's interesting is, we just did this Art of Marriage, which is a 6-part video series that couples can go through to help their marriage. And if you have not done it, you need to do it. It'd be a great thing for you to do after you listen to this podcast. But the fourth session is on the Greek word luo, which means to release. It's a Greek word. It means to release or to let it go. Literally, to let it go, which is what we use for forgiveness.
Ooh.
So it is this act of, I am choosing to let something go. It doesn't mean that you always obviously these couples forgot it. Like they did actually forgive and forget. Yes. But it also can have the connotation of, I'm choosing not to remember. And some have described it God's way, because God is a being, an entity, obviously, who remembers and knows all. He's outside of time. And so when he forgives us, it's not that he just forgets it and goes away from his memory. It's just that he's choosing not to count it against us. He is letting it go. And so what kind of things are you talking about that highly happy couples let go of? Well,
it's actually two really distinct things. Okay. So there's an in the moment and then there's over time. Okay. So in the moment, interestingly, and I'm saying this as an opinionated person who has had to learn to let it go. This is definitely not my normal personality. But in the moment, the highly happy couples, day-to-day, issues of life, all that kind of stuff, they're just more likely to sort of let it go and defer to one another. Right? Like somebody's going to go, you know what? You care about this more than I do. And you know what? It's not worth it. It's not worth it to get exercised about it. Whatever.
Let's go out to eat. I want fajitas tonight. I really want burgers. Well, how bad do you want burgers?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, those kinds of things, everybody's like, but there's actual disagreements, right? Like there's actual issues. And one couple, the way that they put it with this kind of in the moment stuff is they started laughing when they were explaining this. They were like, it's just like tuna fish. And we went, what?
Yeah.
Like, you're going to have to unpack that. And apparently when they first got married, he had grown up making tuna with onions, which she hated. She had grown up making tuna with relish, which he hated. He didn't like, neither of them liked the other way of doing it. And they got irritated with one another. And it was like, this isn't the right way. And now we have to make 2 different versions and whatever. You're doing it wrong, right? Like all that kind of stuff. And then pretty quickly, because they recognize this is stupid, right? So pretty quickly, they're like, oh, whatever. Like you do it your way, I'll do it my way. Or if that's all that's in the fridge, you either eat it or you don't. And there's no point getting irritated. Like, why are we getting irritated over something that's so minor? And so then they started to realize, oh, well, there's some disagreements about like parenting. Like he thought the discipline should be harsher than she did or whatever. And they would tussle and then go, you know what? It's tuna fish. It's like, it doesn't really, there's no one right or wrong answer here. So, this is not a big deal. It's just like tuna fish. Let's just let it go. you know?
I need a much better analogy because you know what's not on anybody's secret menu?
What's that?
Is tuna fish. 'Cause
Probably not.
Nobody
Yes.
I can't stand tuna fish.
Oh, see, I love it.
Do you
Actually,
really?
I do. I love it. Yeah,
Okay.
I love it.
So I guess in this case, it is like tuna fish.
Yeah.
You like it, I don't.
Exactly. But so that's the in the moment version. Right. Okay. But the second version of that, the second way that this works is beyond the moment and ongoing. And it was also fascinating how many just literally had forgiven and forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
Like forgive and forget really was truly a thing. As I said at the beginning, they couldn't even remember what their arguments were.
Right. Yeah. I like what, just even thinking about that first category of things that we can just let it go. We can just choose. It's you want to do it your way. I'm going to do it my way. It's
That's
not that big. Or the way that somebody, I know for us, for Jen and I, especially early on, because we have learned this over time, that going back to even those older and younger couples, it seems like you didn't let things go in the moment when you were younger as when you do when you're older. And for us, it was about like just cleaning the kitchen. And Jen had a way that she would do it, and it was the right way. And I was clearly the wrong way. And I'm like, I cleaned the kitchen. Look, it's clean. She's like, no, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. It's like, it's not that big of a deal. And so, you know, it can be a tendency for couples to like spouses to hold on to those things tightly at the detriment of your marriage.
Yes.
And I like what Proverbs says on this, Proverbs 29:11, that says it's the glory of one to overlook an offense.
I love that.
You know, and it's not just an offense. It could just be just little things. Oneness doesn't mean sameness. We're going to be different. You're going to make your tuna fish one way. I'm going to make it a different way. Is the issue that important?
And you know what? That's the problem with the difficulty letting things go, is that at the beginning of your marriage, especially. Now, yes, sometimes for some people it goes their whole marriage, but especially at the beginning, it is that important. Of course it's that important. Like, you're going to discipline him more than you're going to like crush his spirit, and he's going to become an alcoholic in high school, and he's never going to go to college, and he's going to be in a gutter somewhere, all because you're disciplining him too harshly right now. Like, your brain just goes like, of course it's this important.
Yeah.
And the reality is that much of the time, really, truly, there is no right or wrong. It's just we disagree, and we are two different people. And obviously, we've spent a lot of time, not just in this podcast series, but in the last ones we've done, that sometimes we're just different people. Often it's a men and women thing. Like, there are just some ways that what's important to me is not important to you, and vice versa.
Can I tell you about one of the ones that we laughed about a lot after reading your book For Women Only?
Okay.
Was when
the one about men. One about men. Yeah.
Yeah, the one that's about, for women only, that talks about men. And it talks about, I think it was in there where you talk about the details about how women would often correct men in public about details.
Yes.
And that was because Jen is a high justice. She's a truth teller. And so I would have a tendency to maybe exaggerate the details just a little bit. Just slightly.
Just
might embellish
the
story just a little bit. Cortez burned the ships, well, he probably scuttled them. Jen would be the one to go, no, he actually sunk them, he scuttled them, and no, but the story sounds better if you see flaming ships going down. And I would get a little chafed when Jen would do that, especially in public. Like, we would do it at marriage conferences where she would correct me on stage.
Ooh.
And we get down and I'd be silent. I would just go silent, and she knew something was wrong. I was like, what's wrong? It's like, well, did you really need to correct me in front of everybody? Like, was it that big of a deal? Like,
especially after we were just talking about respect.
Right. Yeah, exactly. After we were just talking about respect. And so, but now we laugh about it. Now it's like, and even when she might do it, or we watch another couple and we see it happen, and she just kind of will, tap my knee, and it's like, is it that big of a deal? But it's amazing how many even older couples you see where people still do those little things that you go, I know this is going to get under my spouse's skin, but I haven't chosen to let it go. I feel so important. No, it wasn't 3 days. It was 2 days.
Right. Yes. And correcting you in front of other people and all that. I will confess, I might have said this in the first of our podcast series, the questions every wife is asking, about men. I might have confessed out loud that for me, this was one of the big ones. And like you're saying, I didn't realize this is like publicly disrespecting Jeff. Like, this is throwing him under the bus. This is, all those things. And I would do those things, and like, even like out to dinner with friends. And so, some of my friends would every now and then like put their hand on my arm and go, Shaunti, there's this book you should read. Like, shut up.
Yeah.
But no, this is one of these things where it is so important in the moment. And then we step back and we go, oh dear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like letting go of some of those little things. Now, it doesn't mean you're not still not going to have disagreements and arguments. I like what Tim Downs, we quoted him before in another episode. Great speaker. He says, learn to have big fights about big things. It's important. You're going to have disagreements.
Yeah.
And there are things that are a significant issue to you that it is important enough to really work through that thing with your spouse. Have big fights about big things. Have little fights about little things, but don't have big fights about little things.
Yep.
And so many relationships go south because we're just holding on to these little things that if we just overlook them. I mean, how many things does God overlook every day in our life?
Oh my gosh.
He could just strike us down and go, no, that wasn't the right way to go. You're sinning again. Seriously? Why are you thinking that thought? Like he could interrupt us every day with that.
Many, many, many times a day. Yes, exactly. No, I think part of it is there's a tendency in a lot of us to catastrophize. Like, and I had to look up that word when somebody first said, well, that's catastrophizing.
Yeah, is it really a word?
It is a word.
Okay.
It actually is. And that catastrophizing is something that a lot of us have to wrestle with. And it's the feeling in the moment of if this doesn't happen this way, or if this happens this way, it's going to be a catastrophe.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you discipline in that way, it's going to be a catastrophe. And so because of that, you give yourself permission to like really push, because of course, if you don't, it's going to be a catastrophe, as opposed to going, you know what, actually, maybe my entire assumption is wrong. And I am assuming it's going to be a catastrophe because this is not my way.
Right.
And it doesn't mean I'm always right. We have to basically do the translation of that. In this process with this topic, what we're basically saying is, I am right, you are wrong. And we have to, in most cases, there is no one right or wrong. We have to give our spouse the grace, the freedom, a little bit of benefit of the doubt, a little bit of margin to do things differently.
Yeah. And so when we say these things about what are those things you're overlooking, well, there are those things that in the moment, and they might be an offense, or they might just be a way they do something. It might just something that they're doing. Or it's that when things or conflicts have happened, like you were talking about in the first part. Oh, wait, I can't even remember what we talked about. I have really gotten in such a pattern of forgiving that I can forget about a lot of these things.
Well,
right?
You're building a habit.
Right.
Again, all of these are habits. And this is one of the areas where we actually realized when we were looking at the data, a lot of this particular habit is preventative. Like a lot of the other ones, it's about how do you deal with an issue once it's arisen, those kinds of things. This one is actually very, very preventative, because if you have a process of learning to let things go and kind of go, it's okay, it's not that big a deal, or whatever it is that you're telling yourself, and you're empathizing with what matters to them, and you're keeping the temperature from getting really hot to begin with. And then one of the things that we found statistically for the highly happy marriages, they were 10 times more likely in the survey question where we say, how do you do this? Do you let things go? They were 10 times more likely to say, you know what, this question doesn't even apply to me.
Really?
Yeah, because, we really rarely get to the point of being at odds to begin with. Now, obviously, like I said, a lot of people still do get to be at odds and you have conflict, but it was telling that so many of them had gotten to the point where they just, again, it was in the moment, they just kind of went, you know what, it's not worth it. And, you don't even get to the point where it becomes a thing.
Yeah.
So it's preventative.
That's good. Yeah. That's really good. And I think too, just even thinking about those things, when I think about things that you can overlook or just let go, you do have an opportunity here. If you know it's something that's irritating your spouse, like a bad habit, like a habit that you have, like for me, I don't worry about being late all that much. Like Jen, it's a big deal. It's like if you're on time, you're late. She operates kind of in that mentality, and that's beneficial in so many areas of life. At a job, at work, going to church. You never know when you're getting interrupted in some way on the way. And so it is a great habit to have. Is it scripture? No. Okay. There's no like punctuality is the next best thing to godliness. No, that's not in scripture. But at the same time, if she's constantly overlooking that in my life, and I'm putting her in that position to be this constant letting it go, constant letting it go, constant letting it go, that's really not being loving to my spouse. Like if I've lived with her long enough to know that gets under her skin.
Yeah.
So when it's rare, it's a lot easier to overlook something, to let it go. When you constantly do it, then it's like, man, I'm making her be a constant overlooker, and I don't want to do that. And so, like, I've learned there's a certain way that Jen loves the kitchen to be cleaned, and she wants all the. I just found this out like 2 years ago. She actually wants all the bubbles out from the dish soap, and I'm like, I'm just soaking the sink. It's making it clean, you know. She's like, no, you rinse it all out, and I didn't find that out till marriage conference when we got up on stage and talked. She's like, this really irritates me, and I didn't even know that. And so now it's like, okay, now I have a choice. Do I
now that you know
now
exactly?
That I know. But when you have that outdoing on one another and showing honor, then I do think it becomes less and less of the small things become less and less of a big deal.
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, the thing that I would just, again, the demographic difference where it was far more likely these, you know, couples, when they got just a little bit further into marriage, it was like, yeah, whatever. Right. And so I kind of want to speak to all the young couples out there and go, realize you're going to get there eventually.
Yeah.
Like there will come a day when you're like, yeah, whatever. So you might as well get there now.
That's right. Go there now.
Right.
Be early.
Yes, exactly. We have to sort of say, you know what? It matters so much. Well,
yeah,
maybe not.
One of the things that I hope happens with Married with Benefits is that you guys end up engaging in great conversations. That's one of the reasons why I love Weekend to Remember with FamilyLife. It's a 3-day experience where couples come together and have the conversations they most need to have, but probably aren't having for whatever reason. In fact, we got a letter from a lady that went to the Weekend to Remember in Destin, Florida. Good place to go, by the way. And she said this about it. She said, it created the pause and became the catalyst for us to have the conversations we have swept under the rug because we have been too busy or didn't want to rock the boat. 10 years later, the rug is full and we keep tripping over it. I'm thankful for this time and look forward to revisiting and working through our marriage goals from home together. That's what we're all about here at FamilyLife, helping you have the conversations that matter most, whether it's listening to this podcast or going to something like a Weekend to Remember. You can find a great spot to go to at any one of our 80 locations if you look up weekendtoremember.com, or we have the link in our show notes. All right, back to more great conversations here on Married with Benefits. What are some little things that we can do to apply this secret, Shaunti? What are some ways that we can go, how can I become somebody who just lets things go?
Okay, so I think that there's several relatively simple steps, but I will say from the very beginning, it was clear that this particular topic was actually one of the ones that 100% do not come naturally for the vast majority of people.
Yeah.
There are a few people who have just like a kind of a personality that they're like, yeah, whatever.
No big deal.
Yeah, but they still had things they care about. Anyway, the key was that just recognize that most people don't have this mindset. Most of us, this is going to take a little bit of work.
Right.
And so here's the things that we think will actually help that work happen. The first is constantly in the moment when you're irritated, think about I need to prioritize the relationship over being right. Right?
That's
like
big.
it's and because it's all about, as we keep saying in some of these habits, it's all about interrupting what you're naturally going to do. Right. Like we talked about brutal honesty and we talked about, you know, that you have to kind of interrupt that. Okay, I got to relearn how to think before I speak and figure out how to be honest, to be kind. Right. So it's the same exact principle. You interrupt that irritation and go, what's more important now? The relationship or being right? So that's a
great little gut check in that. And so, you know, to first get your mind right. And then I think it is determine, is this something, because it's a valid question. There are some things you don't need to let go. We're not saying, don't hear us say that it's like, okay, this means you'll be conflict free.
No, or that you let everything go.
Right.
But item number 2 is figure out, is this thing that we're about to get into conflict over?
Right.
Is this something that is worth that conflict, or is it something I might possibly hypothetically need to just chill
and
about?
so we want to give you a diagnostic of here's some questions that you can ask to determine whether or not I need to let it go. First of all, will this even matter in 6 months? You know, is this something that I'm going to really want to be arguing about? This is tuna fish, right? Who cares exactly how it's made? It's still going to be bad, by the way. But whether you put, grapes in it or celery or whatever it is, relish.
Ew, grapes.
I don't know.
I think you're taking chicken salad.
Oh, chicken salad.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't like grapes in my chicken salad either. Anyway, I'm very particular about salad type stuff. So will this matter in 6 months, right? That's a great question to ask. And underneath that, just saying, okay, is what I'm dealing with, is this about a godly principle or is it just a preference? I think that's a great question to ask yourself.
That question will help unlock a lot of people. Write it down. Is this thing a godly principle? Is this a scriptural principle? Or is this a personal preference?
Right.
Those two things are very different. And it's like you said, like sometimes the personal preferences are really important and they should be important to you because they're important to your spouse, like being late, right?
Yeah.
Like my version of that is that Jeff loves on church on Sunday. He wants to get there 3, 4, 5, 10 minutes early so that he can settle in. He can have that worshipful mindset. He can focus on what's, going on. Right. He hates trying to find a parking spot and running in before it starts. Like that it interrupts his whole morning. He
don't want to be fashionably late to church? That's not his MO?
No. But that's an example.
Yeah.
Like that is a preference. It's not a godly principle. So if there's something going on, it's like he has to sort of go, okay, this isn't worth getting upset about. But if I'm constantly making him late, then I'm not caring about something that's important to him.
Exactly. Yeah. And that really still goes under that idea of, will this matter in 6 months? If it's a godly principle, it will matter in 6 months.
Absolutely.
If it's a preference, it probably won't. It's like if it's about, are we putting something else on the credit card and we keep getting further and further in debt?
It's going to matter.
We don't want to let that go.
Yep.
Second question I think is a good one to ask in this diagnosis. Is this a repetitive pattern that needs to be addressed?
Yes.
And I know that that's happened. And really, how do I know if this is a repetitive pattern? This is the third question. Am I likely to become bitter or resentful if we don't discuss it? Yeah. And Jen and I had this agreement where we were like, we're going to go screen free at night, like at right before bed, last 30 minutes, no screens. Yeah, it was great. And then I just wanted to check my email one more time, or I wanted to watch something, because we don't have a TV in our bedroom, and so I would pick up my phone, and after about a week of this, started to see that I was letting my phone kind of come back in. Jen's like, hey, I thought we were gonna not have screens. I thought you weren't gonna be looking at your phone. Why are you looking at your phone? And I got irritated with her. It's like, what are you trying to parent me right now? Like, I'm an adult. I can make my own decisions. And if I want to break this commitment, I'll break this commitment.
Not your best moment. Yes,
no,
exactly.
It wasn't. And I was irritated, and I turned the light out. I went to bed mad. But the next day, because I listened to our podcast, I said, I was wrong, because you were right. You were just pointing out something that we had agreed to. It became a repetitive habit, and she was starting to get resentful over it.
Yeah.
And
we have seen in the data of a bunch of different studies that statistically the most dangerous emotion for the marriage is resentment.
Yeah. Yep.
And so if that's something that you're like, this is going to start causing me resentment, then that's something that you don't let go. You have to address it.
Well, I like this fourth question. So, will this matter in 6 months? Is it a repetitive pattern that needs to be addressed? Am I likely to become resentful over this if we don't discuss it? I like this question, Shaunti. Ask your spouse, because this really is getting proactive.
Yes.
And it's moving the focus off of you, because so much of this, the reason why it becomes such a block in our relationship is that we're holding so tightly to what we want. We never take the time to go, why do they want this? Why is it that they feel so strongly about this? All we care about is, this is what I feel.
Right.
And I want you to validate what I'm feeling before I ever come into your world. So I love this question. How important is this to me versus how important is this to my spouse? And so I think it's addressing both of those. How do I feel about it? But I'm also going to be proactive and go, how do you feel about it?
Well, a key thing, this is something actually we heard from several of the couples that independently had figured this out. And independently, several of them had basically gotten into a habit of saying, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this to you? On a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this to me? And that right there, helped address so many things.
And it's a diffuser. It's because all of a sudden my emotions have to stop, because now I got to think logically about something.
Yes. And also it's sort of this is an 8 to you, but it's kind of a 4 to me. Why am I holding on and getting so okay? That's something maybe I shouldn't be so exercised about. And you're right. There's a little bit of logic that comes into play. And okay, maybe I shouldn't catastrophize. or simply because I love my spouse. Maybe
Right.
I should defer to what matters to them because it's an 8 for them.
Right.
So that one will help.
Yeah, I mean, that's going back to what Paul says in Philippians, which so many of these go back to that Philippians 2 passage of do not merely look out for your own interests,
Yep.
but also for the interests of the others. And if it now, but Shaunti, what if we both feel like a 9 on this?
Yeah. Well, this is where we go back to godly principle, preference. This is where we go back to, is it worth me being right over the sort of the peace in the relationship? I love this one guy put it this way. I love what he said. And the quote was, I have to ask myself, is getting my way on this or being right on this more important? And then he lists 2 things, more important than A, the happiness of my spouse.
It's good.
It's a pretty big question.
Yeah.
Right. Or B, more important than the peace in my marriage.
Wow.
And you know what? Sometimes it is.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it is that important.
Right.
And that's where you have to go to all the other things that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you have to really dig into the communication. And that's where you have to dig into the trust and believing the best of the other person's intentions and putting God first and asking God, what does he want? Because
Right.
he's not going to tell you 2 different things. So that's where you have to go into those. But if it's not, that's where sometimes just de-escalating a little bit and saying, you know what, the peace in my marriage is more important.
Just if I can give one more quote from your book on, or again, the secret chapter, where one person said, it is so important to say you don't have to agree on everything. You don't have to wrestle with your spouse to the floor to get him to agree with your point of view. I feel this way. You better feel this way. It's like, it's actually just addressing the fact that we don't have to have agreement on everything.
Yep.
Oneness isn't sameness. And so there are going to be times where I need to be willing to die to myself, right? And there's going to be times where our spouse is going to do that. When both people are kind of in that type of a relationship, you actually start honoring each other to the point where it's like, no, I'll let you have your
first.
way.
Yeah, you do first.
Exactly.
You go first.
Yeah,
exactly.
give and it'll be given unto you. So great. So that's a great diagnostic. Those 4 questions, I'll give them again. Will this even matter in 6 months? Is this a repetitive pattern that needs to be addressed? Am I likely to become bitter or resentful over this if we don't discover it? And then to ask each other, how important is this to me versus how important is this to you? On a scale of 1 to 10, it's a great practice. So that helps me determine, is this something I need to let go in a moment, right?
Yep. And if we have then said, okay, you know what, this is something little rather than big, right? For me at this moment in this time, then I can learn, item number 3, not to sweat the small stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Like just major on the majors, like Tim Downs said. Like the big stuff, don't fight about the little stuff, right?
Right.
And so one of the things that we have to kind of switch in our head is saying that it's okay to do that.
Yeah.
It's okay to not sweat the small stuff.
Right.
I love this comment. It made me laugh so hard in the moment where this couple, we were talking to them and he said, when we got married, early on, we went to counseling and the counselor told us that we really had to stay on top of the little foxes, right? Like Song of Solomon,
verse, right?
Like, the little foxes that destroy the vineyard.
Yes.
Because, if you don't stay on top of those little things, they could destroy your marriage. And I get that. Like, and I'm pretty sure the counselor was referring to things like, I'll just go out with my female colleague for lunch without anybody there a few times, like it's just little, it's no big deal, right? Like, yeah, if you don't stay on top of that, that could really become a problem. I'm pretty sure that he didn't mean, were you late again?
Right.
I'm pretty, whatever. And so,
or do you load the dishwasher the way you do it again?
Right. Exactly. And so, but apparently the wife took this really seriously. Like, we have to stay on top of the little foxes. Like, I'm you were late again and this and that and the other thing. And she kept saying, it's the little foxes. And he said, after a while, I wanted to take out my .22 and shoot the little foxes. Like,
and how fun that would be.
Like, can we just stop focusing so much on all these little things?
Yeah.
And that to me was a pretty important, little piece. Yes, we've decided what we can let go. And then, hey, that means we actually have to do it. Right.
Well, I think lastly, I think it's important to remember how do you practice those habits to help you let it go? I know for me, one of the things that I did not let go of very easily is I wouldn't apologize very well to Jen when things went wrong. I would always follow my sorries with a but. I'm sorry, but if you knew how stressful it was at work today, you'd understand why I was late tonight. Or I'm sorry, but the way you said that to me just really got under my skin. So I'm not really sorry. Whenever our sorries are followed by a big but, they just knock the sorry out of the way. And I've had to learn how to go, okay, how do I practice those habits to help let it go? It's just, I need to learn how to apologize. I need to learn how to forgive. If forgiveness really is that luo word from the Greek, to let it go, when God forgives something, he removes it. It says in Psalm 103, as far as the east is from the west, which I find really interesting in a time in the ancients that had no idea about, the directions, and they thought the world was flat and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, if you go north, eventually on a globe, you'll go south. If you go east,
eventually
you'll never go west. You'll just keep going east. And so it's not because God couldn't remember those things or choose to. It's just that he has chosen to forget, to let it go. And so learning a great apology, learning a great practice of forgiveness, that I'm actually going to choose not to remember that anymore. That's why these couples have, amnesia. They have a relational amnesia. And that's what great happy couples have, relational amnesia.
Well, another one of the habits that will help you let it go is practice holding a mirror up to yourself. And realize there are things about you that your spouse has to let go all the time.
That's so
right?
good.
You have to be aware of that. It's not just about them. It's about me.
Yep. Letting them be gracious towards you. And I think, just again, that practice of learning to be more curious about how they're feeling about something will help inform, maybe it's not that big of a deal, because they're really it really
matters. There's a reason that they have an 8.
That's right.
They've rated it an 8. Yep. Actually, I think as a way we need to wrap this up, we need to acknowledge that there's sort of a hard truth that comes along with this. And it comes back to that thing we've talked about before of it's not always about what's fair.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there is a thing about dying to self. I love this one this was a happy couple, highly happy couple. And this husband, this is what he said. They had a really difficult marriage. They had butted heads constantly. They both had really strong personalities, both very strong opinions. And he said, candidly, what turned the marriage around, and they both said that this was what did it, was his revelation. He had this thought. He said, I realized I don't like to be wrong. I am super competitive, but eventually I realized there is one thing that I am not going to compete in, and that's the relationship in this home. I'm not going to do it. I will be wrong, and I will be wronged sometimes. Right. So we can be right. And that is part of my responsibility. Yep. And I would say both of us have that responsibility in marriage. It doesn't seem fair why should I have to let it go? Well, again, we've talked before. You don't have to do anything. But what is it that marriage is created for? And if we honor that and work with that, it'll tend to work better. Yeah.
When you say that, it reminds me of when Paul talks about in Philippians 3, where he says that I may know him and the power of his resurrection, right? And then he follows that up with, and be in the fellowship of his sufferings.
And it's this curious phrase.
Right. Yeah. And so it's like there's something about both of those things that, we want the power. We want a great relationship. We want to identify with Jesus in his power of this resurrection, but then also to be identified with the fellowship of his sufferings. Well, how did Christ suffer on earth? Well, he was wronged. He was wronged a lot. There was a lot of injustice that was committed. He
didn't insist on everything being fair, for sure.
Yeah, he did not insist on his own way. He would say, it's not my will, but thy will be done. And so you just go, well, if I'm going to I want the power, I also have to accept the sufferings. Yeah. And the good news is we don't have to suffer like Jesus suffered, nearly to that kind of injustice. We'll never come close to what he has endured. But we have the opportunity daily in marriage to actually taste a little bit of what that looks like, that I'm going to be wrong and I'm going to be wronged against.
Yeah.
But
occasionally.
Yeah. And obviously if your marriage that's the whole marriage, then you need to get help, and that's a whole different discussion. But for most of us, it's probably good to not be right.
Yeah.
It's probably good to die to self.
Yeah,
because
it's an opportunity.
It's an opportunity. And that's exactly what the Christian life promises, is that, when you lose, you win. And when you have this habit that we see modeled in highly happy couples, is that they're willing to lose if it means the relationship wins. So I'm glad we got to taste a little bit of something on the secret menu.
Yep.
Yeah,
this one's important for
you
all
should.
of
Well,
us.
if you redo this book, you need to put it in there.
I know. See if I can get more words.
That's right. All right. Thanks, Shaunti. Thanks for joining us for this episode. If you enjoy this podcast, please hit like or subscribe. And please leave a review or a comment. It just helps get the word out to more couples so that they can find hope for their own marriage. And listen, if you haven't picked up Shaunti's book that we're talking about all this season long, The Surprising Secrets of Highly Happy Marriages, you're going to want to get that and maybe grab one to give away, because that's really what we're about here at Family Life. We want to help you experience oneness so that you can impact your corner of the world. And listen, we've got a lot more help and hope for your marriage and family at FamilyLife.com. You can find other articles, you can find podcasts, you can find shows, small group resources. You'll want to check that out at FamilyLife.com.